Climate change, an issue we know all too much yet so little about. From both of our surveys, we could find that, number one, a lot of people were not very sure about the new green technologies, and number two, a lot of people didn't know about the specifics of clean energy usage. According to the UN, if we do not cut our emissions by half by 2030, the world will pass a point of no return, where climate change will continually worsen itself, even without any human emissions. Currently, the only two countries that have more than 50% of its energy coming from clean sources is Iceland at around 79% and Norway at around 66%. For reference, the US has around 9% of its energy coming from clean sources, and China is slightly better off at around 12.6%. Currently, governments and organizations are doing a lot to combat climate change. However, because of the recent pandemic, a lot of these measures had to be scaled back or canceled completely.
Next, let's talk about clean energy. So let's start off with the definition of clean energy. Clean energy is energy that is produced in a carbon neutral or carbon negative process. Some renewable energy types include wind, which is turbines, solar, which is also known as photovoltaic, which is from solar panels which are made from silicon, and they directly translate solar energy into electricity. Then there are hydro, which is dams, which the energy from flowing water turns turbines, then it generates electricity. The title is the same thing, except it uses the tides from the ocean. And lastly, there's geothermal, which utilizes heat from the Earth's mantle to heat up water, making steam, and then that turns turbines and generates electricity as well. So there's a common misconception about electricity is that electricity is clean. Although electricity has the possibility of being clean, it is not always clean, because most electricity actually comes from the burning of fossil fuels. So, for example, electric cars, although they are technically cleaner because they are not directly producing carbon, they're still not fully clean, because most electricity actually comes from fossil fuels.
Although I think we can all agree that climate change is bad, there hasn't really been a good example of climate change's human impact. Until recently, namely the Texas snowstorm. In fact, climate change was a major contributing factor to the snowstorm. According to the article, The Texas Snowstorm is a Climate Cautionary Tale by Times Magazine, scientists say that warming in the Arctic, where temperatures are rising faster than anywhere else on the planet, may be weakening the jet stream that typically keeps the cold air trapped deep in the northern hemisphere. A weakened jet stream allows the cold air to flow southward to lower latitudes. The Texas snowstorm is just one example of weather becoming more and more unpredictable as climate change worsens, and scientists also predict that weather disasters like the snowstorm will continue to become more common as climate change worsens as well.
Now let's talk about accessibility. Accessibility can be partially solved by government programs and incentives, but it cannot fully fix it. So as you can see, we're at a charging station for cars here in Shanghai, and it's very common to see electric cars and charging stations in Shanghai. And this is because of the vast majority of electric car dealerships and charging stations here. But Shanghai is a special case. Most places have little to no electric charging stations, and in China there's barely under 5,000 charging stations, whereas there's over 100,000 gas stations. So the infrastructure for electric cars just isn't there, and it's not accessible, so it's not very smart to buy electric cars.
Now let's talk about government programs and incentives. Many governments in developing countries have tried to make advancements towards the use of clean energy. The way they're doing this is by creating programs and incentives for the use of clean energy. Some of these incentives include a tax credit and subsidies. For example, there's the net metering system in America, less of a program, more of a system. And when an establishment has a renewable energy source, the amount of energy used by the establishment is subtracted from how much energy was generated. And if there's any energy left, the energy left can be sold to utility companies. There's also the investment tax credit, or ITC, which was established in 2005 by the Energy Policy Act. This helps increase the use of solar energy quite a lot in America by 52%. What it did is it provided a 26% tax credit on residential and commercial solar electric installations and a few other types of renewable energies. The program, however, was cut by 30% the past year, and commercial solar energy systems now only receive 10% tax credit, and residential only receives 0. And next we have a quote from Xi Jinping. He said, "Developing new energy vehicles is essential for China's transformation from a big automobile country to a powerful automobile country. We should increase research and development, seriously analyze the market, adjust existing policies, and develop new products to meet the needs of different customers. This can make a strong contribution to the economic growth." Many municipalities in China, such as Beijing and Shanghai, provide free license plates to electric and hybrid cars. This is a very big incentive for the use of clean cars, because in China most license plates cost $12,000. So this is a very big part of buying a car, and it's quite a big discount.
Although government incentives and programs are vital to laying the groundwork, we need corporations on board as well. Corporations nowadays hold a lot of power, and for much change to happen, we need them on board as well. Corporations are setting a lot of climate goals, however, they tend to be deceptive in these goals. For example, take Procter & Gamble. They have set a goal to cut emissions in half by 2030. However, this only applies to what's known as Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions that either their facilities or energy providers create. The NRDC, Natural Resource Defense Council, estimates this to be around 4 million tons per year for Procter & Gamble. However, this doesn't take into account the Scope 3 emissions, which are emissions that product disposal and resource harvesting create. The NRDC estimates this to be around 215 million tons per year for Procter & Gamble. Since the 50% only applies to Scope 1 and Scope 2, they're only going to cut 2 million tons of emissions out of 215 million. That is less than 1% of their total emissions. With the deadline for having most of our energy coming from clean sources a short 9 years away, we have to have change, and this change must start with the government, but government change must start with the people. And by government change, I mean implementing more incentives for the people to use more clean energy and for the corporations to follow suit as well. Thank you.